there was an op-ed in The Hill by a gentleman, James Durso. And in this op-ed, he said that he spoke to an anonymous American diplomat. In 2024 of April, there was a band of Ukrainian officials, including Budanov, who came to Washington. The roundtable discussions that happened, this diplomat said that they were concerned that Ukraine had lost momentum and would be overwhelmed. They advocate instead for asymmetric warfare inside of Russia to gain an upper hand in negotiations to end the war. So, Scott, a lot has happened since April of 2024. What does this say about the changing character of the conflict and how things have shaped up? Because this seems to be a pretty big bombshell that there were people inside of Washington who knew what was going to come in the preceding months.
First of all, let's start with the premise that the United States never believed Ukraine could win this war. And the United States never prepared Ukraine for a war-winning strategy. But the United States did, in the lead up to the special military operation beginning in the years leading up, was to train the Ukrainians to mount a vigorous defense, knowing that it would collapse. And then the CIA, through its Special Activities Division, together with Joint Special Operations personnel, had trained a significant stay-behind element amongst Ukrainian special forces, special operations forces, territorial forces, etc. This is part of an old American approach. I may have mentioned it before, but Detachment A of the Berlin Brigade was a special forces detachment that specialized in unconventional warfare, and their wartime mission was to get overrun by the Soviets and then to begin waging guerrilla warfare against the Soviets. This is a special forces mission, unconventional warfare, guerrilla warfare. It's a CIA paramilitary mission, and we trained a significant number of Ukrainian special forces. Budanov received this training as well. This was always the plan. The plan was always to lure the Russians in, get them bogged down, and then to make them bleed to death over a period of time, and present a situation where, while Russia wasn't losing the war, Russia wasn't winning the war, and therefore morale would be sapped within Russia. This is part of the overall strategy that the CIA has had for some time now of bringing down the Russian government, collapsing the Russian government. You do this in a combination of ways. You use economic warfare. That's what the sanctions were supposed to do. The CIA has a long history of working on democracy in Russia, and it's just the exact opposite of creating so-called democratic opposition forces that are working on behalf of the United States and other intelligence services to undermine democracy in Russia. And then in the case of Ukraine, to actually prepare the stay-behind forces, the Jedburghs. And this was always a strategy. This is why when General Miley briefed Congress at the start of the special military operation that the Ukrainian army would probably fall, Kiev would fall within a week. The director of the CIA made a similar assessment. Nobody expected Ukraine to stand up. And to be honest, while the Ukrainian resistance was a little bit more resilient than maybe thought, that also might be linked to the fact that the Russians had zero combat experience at the start of the war, and they made a lot of mistakes. But the Russians weren't beat. If you think the Russians got beat in phase one of this war, you don't know anything about war. Russia took casualties, but they prevailed. They inflicted a lot of harm on the Ukrainians, but the Russians made a decision. The special military operation kicked off not for the purpose of occupying Ukraine, but compelling Ukraine to the negotiating table. And Russia achieved that objective. That's what the Istanbul communique was all about at the end of March. And the Russians were successful. But then the collective West made a decision by rejecting the Istanbul communique to engage in conventional warfare. And from that moment on, the CIA took on a task of selling this conventional warfare to the public. And they work with the Ukrainians. This is where you get the Center for Countering Disinformation. You get a whole bunch of other propaganda outlets in Ukraine working together with mainstream outlets. I can tell you that the British have a hand in glove relationship with the British press, German intelligence with the German press, American intelligence with the American press. And all we did is start spreading propaganda about how Ukraine's going to win this war. I will tell you right now, with absolute certainty, that the President of the United States was never briefed that Ukraine is going to win this war. We always knew Ukraine could not win this war, that Ukraine would not win this war, but the goal was to make the price of Russian victory so high that Russia would collapse. That was the goal. It's always been to generate a Moscow Maidan, to get the citizens of Moscow to rise up, surround the Kremlin, and demand that Putin go because the Russian boys are dying in Ukraine. It's an endless war. We can't win it. And the Ukrainians are blowing things up in Russia, and they are. The Ukrainian intelligence has penetrated Russia to an extent that the West isn't even aware of. The FSB is aware because they're rolling up these cells every day. And on occasion, these guys have successes. They blow up trains, they blow up recruiting offices, they assassinate people. There is an unconventional war taking place. It's CIA directed, CIA backed, CIA promoted, but it's not having the impact because the decision was never made to shift over to full attention on unconventional warfare. Instead, a decision was made to continue to promote conventional warfare as the optimal way of dragging the Russians down. It failed. But at no time, and I think history will prove this when they declassify the archives, at no time did anybody of note ever turn to the president and say, "We got this one, boss. Ukraine's going to win this war." Because only a moron would say that. Truly, only a moron would say that. There's no way you could possibly come up with the mobilization of defense industrial capabilities needed to match that which Russia has done. I mean, they're playing political games, but there's not seriousness behind it. There's not serious military force behind any of these statements about Ukrainian winning, other than dead Ukrainians. And that's the reality. So no, nobody ever told the president of the United States. And this diplomat, I don't know who he is and all that, but don't be shocked by the fact that somebody says Ukraine was never going to win this war. We knew from day one Ukraine was never going to win this war. All we wanted to do was inflict harm on Russia. We wanted to make this war so costly that it created domestic political unrest inside Russia that led to the toppling of the Putin government.
Larry, in this article where this anonymous diplomat said that he was essentially there for these talks between the US and Ukrainian side, you had the Ukrainian side literally saying, "We are done. We can't really go on in this way." And I'm curious on what you make of the fact that there have been so many developments since then that have only escalated the situation for Ukraine.
Well, never underestimate the power of bureaucracy and self-interest in these bureaucracies within the U.S. government. The program, campaign, operation, describe it however you will, to destroy Russia using Ukraine as a springboard has been a U.S. objective now for 80 years, or going on 80 years, and it's sort of waxed and waned over time. Sometimes it's grown in intensity, then it's subsided. But since really 2008, there has been a sustained effort on a broad front where you get the different organizations, whether it's European Command in conducting joint military exercises with Ukraine, both through EUCOM on a bilateral basis, as well as through primarily through NATO. And the purpose of these exercises are both to train and equip the Ukrainian army for its eventual mission of destroying Russia. That was the intent. When you consider the fact that the CIA, they've openly acknowledged now that they had over 20 bases in Ukraine. We need to put this into context. The normal CIA lash up is you'll have a CIA station, And then there will be a subsidiary called a base. But normally those bases will consist of one with maybe, 3 or 4 other people. We saw an example of a CIA base in Benghazi. That base had a specific mission of collecting weapons from Libya that were going to be then that were transferred subsequently overseas, delivered to the Turks. The Turks in turn delivered them to Islamic extremists in Syria. So in that operation, you had one base. In Ukraine, the United States has had 20 bases. And I've been asking some of my, CIA colleagues who are retired, who are involved in a variety of, operations overseas, covert activities. And during the war in Afghanistan, I think that we had a total of 8. It may have been 10 bases in Afghanistan. Think about that. During Vietnam, possibly we had, around 16 bases scattered throughout South Vietnam and then over into neighboring countries. To have 20 bases in Ukraine is significant. So it's like we don't give a damn how many Ukrainians die. It doesn't matter to us. They're not our family. They're not our blood. They're just a tool to be used. I mean, it's so sick, so twisted what the United States is doing to the country of the Ukraine, to the people of Ukraine, that they literally are cannon fodder. They're pawns to be dispensed in some great game of chess that we're really bad at playing. And as a result, the Ukrainians are paying the price, and we're not letting up. We're not stopping, because you've got to get into what were these various bases doing. And I've heard a term the last couple of days with respect to this Green Beret active duty member who blew himself up outside the Trump Tower in Vegas. He was active duty at Panzerkasern, which is just southwest of Stuttgart. They've got 3 main military bases in Stuttgart. But he was with 10th Group, Special Forces in the Army, and he was described by one of his buddies as a lled bird. Now, the lled birds were teams that were, Americans, Brits, and French formed them in World War II. Let me suggest to you that what you have right now are lled bird teams have been resurrected, and one of those functions of one of those bases is to supervise the operations of these lled birds as they go in to try to both carry out terrorist attacks in Russia, to organize cells in Russia, and to facilitate sabotage operations. So the United States isn't letting up, even though the Ukrainians are dying and bleeding and cannot win.
This gentleman, James Durso, said he was in the U.S. Navy for 20 years. He highlights corruption inside of the Ukrainian regime, highlighting Zelensky especially as a full throttle participant in this corruption. And we've talked about this on the program before, but a lot of it seemed like a deflection of the U.S. role in all of this and the U.S. role in fueling everything that Larry just described. Your comment on this framing of Zelensky as really the primary problem here, given these revelations we've been discussing?
No, I mean, Larry and Scott pretty much covered it all, but I just want to add one thing, which I'm writing now, second decade in. Fact is, I was writing it, realistically, it's in the third. Those people in Washington, be them CIA, Pentagon, what have you, they are one-trick ponies. They live on this mythology that somehow Soviet Union has been defeated in Afghanistan and collapsed because of that. It is, of course, a complete mythology, the same way as the World War II started in the United States, including in the military academies. They still think that, I'm not exaggerating. It literally comes down to it that Patton, ran through the whole damn Germany and Hitler collapsed, So, but the point is that there is not a single competent Russian specialist in the US government today and hasn't been in the last 20 years. The only person who had been a true connoisseur, if you wish, of Russia and Russian national character, idiosyncrasies, and things of this nature is Jack Matlock, the ambassador, the last ambassador of the United States to Soviet Union. The rest of them, including Mr. Burns, and they are nincompoops. They may speak Russian language, some of them at least, but most of them, and what passes in all those Russian study programs, be them in whatever CIA outlets or FBI or let alone military service academies, it's all fraud. It's academic fraud, which doesn't recognize the fact that well, frankly, the United States doesn't know how to calculate correlation of forces and means. Simple as that. I actually made another video today about this. When you have your garbage into these models, and what you get garbage out, because the models suck, honestly. And basically, the United States is not good at studying history and actually knowing how the world outside works. This is not my words. This is PhD Daniel Larison. So he is a very famous American, writer and historian. He was published on the American Conservative. Well, now he writes for this, Andrew Basevich's outlet of the, responsible statecraft. It's not very much interesting, how to put it, outlet. But reality is, the United States never knew anything. And least of all, they knew about Russians. Because obviously, when you read intensively what is written about Russia, there is only one real historical book about the Eastern Front. It is written by David Glantz and Jonathan House. The rest of it is just all mythology. It's all Hollywood. It's all, And when you have people which you think they are subhumans, but that's, for example, most of those CIA guys, they never saw anything like this. They do not understand how it works. They don't understand what kind of the historic experience in mobilization economy Russians bring to the table. United States has no even clue. It's nowhere near in understanding how it works. But they never studied Russia. Well, they studied Russia through Solzhenitsyn. If you have even such a great American military mind as Colonel McGregor, believing that actually Stalin and NKVD executed 1 million Red Army soldiers in 1941, you have problems, okay? And you have problems not only on the issue of merely military history. You will have problems on, even today, operationally and strategically. And we saw it unfolding right in the front of our eyes. The only thing what they have, sabotage, terrorism, that's what they're only good at. They're not good at combined arms, period. Let's face it. Practically all command corps, starting from when General Miley was, of course, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, let alone those Philip Breedlove, or Ben Hodges, they are not serious generals. They are laughed at in Russia. They do not even understand the discrepancy, the abyss, professional military abyss, which separates the two militaries and intelligence. Mr. Lyubimov, he is former KGB. He was former SVR, first directorate. He was also the father of the famous Russian journalist, but he was, spy in Great Britain. And he was on the cover, at some point of time. And so, and what he was asked few years back, and believe me, this is not the best guy to have the advice, but still, who is the best intelligence, in the world? Everybody like the CIA says, not even in the same league with British, and British are not good either. The only thing, of course, are Mossad, because they have their, diaspora, and they can kind of, penetrate over. So you looking at people who literally do not know what they are doing. When you believe that Russian economy is smaller than Italy's, what do you expect? You expect the same army, which is what? All those recruits, dirty, unfed, demoralized, and they never studied. They never studied even Eastern Front. They have no grasp what it is, because they don't have reference point. And with the large generation of American military specialists, of course, the scale of Ike, or Omar Bradley, General Hodges, not Ben Hodges. So the people who still remember the war, who could convey this, they're gone. There's nobody there. There's nobody who, you have the people from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point writing that, oh yeah, Patriots are shooting down the Kinzhals really well. So the fact that U.S. military and intelligence bought this Ukrainian propaganda tells you everything you need to know. That means what? Real professionals know how to create the situation with the competing hypotheses and develop information to be properly informed and develop what they don't have, knowledge. There is no knowledge of Russia in the United States, period. I know who those people who are Russian specialists in the United States. It's a service.